It's good to see everybody. Good to see some old friends that I hadn't got to see yet. I know it has been a full week for a lot of y'all, and most of y'all have been here just about every time. I've appreciated that. I certainly appreciate as well those who have joined us on the various social medias. I'm learning the word Zoom, and we I guess are posted on Facebook, so I've kind of known about that for a few years, but I didn't know how wide it could go when y'all promoted. I think there was over 400 views on Facebook, and I thought I hadn't had 400 views this year, and happy. Actually, I have, but they've been most of the same people. So it's been really good to be able to not only join those of you here in person and enjoy the fellowship and the singing, to be able to look at your expressions and see the smiles on your faces, but also for those of you who I can't see yet who have been so faithful to worship in the way that you can right now. And so welcome to everybody. I was looking at my stopwatch after class and noticing it was starting to get a little bit weak, and I was just kind of saying something out loud, and I really appreciate Cason because he immediately said, "I can get you batteries." And I don't know, I'm sure he meant that in the very best possible way. This is the very best possible time for me to have batteries, because instead of going between 35 and 40 minutes, I will just keep it to about 22 minutes this morning because that's what I've prepared. But hopefully it will be a 22 minutes that is worth your time. It will be certainly as you look at the scriptures that we're going to be looking at this morning. And as always, my main intent as a preacher is I hope I can stay out of the way of the scriptures and let them encourage you. Appreciated Joe's addition to the scriptures, and Mark's as well as the fine song service. I certainly appreciated David's prayer this morning to start us off as well, and then the kind way that Brian did the communion. I thought that was, it's just nice to get together and worship with y'all. I was thinking also, one of the things I really enjoy about worshiping with y'all is I don't have to worry about whether it's too hot or too cold, because I'm not the thermostat guy. Being the preacher in Happy, Texas also has several other very honored roles, among them being the secretary and the lawn boy and occasionally the maintenance man. And I have electrocuted myself on more than one occasion there doing that. And so it makes me appreciate some of our electricians even more. I enjoyed the Bible class this morning. I appreciate the fact that y'all are so faithful in that. I know that these times kind of limit us to some of the things we can do, but I do think Bible class is so important, and I enjoy Bible class. Some of the best stories I have heard have been from the little kids in the Bible class. As a matter of fact, I think Tanya was telling us about some of them, but two of my favorite I just have heard through the years. I'm not sure who they were with, but there was one teacher who was just getting exasperated with the little boy, and he just wouldn't stop. Kind of like a preacher. He may have been a preacher, may have been me, I'm not really sure. But anyway, as he kept going, she just said, "Tim, if you don't settle down, I'm just really afraid that one of us may not be seeing the other in heaven." And he looked at her shocked, and he said, "Mrs. Wilson, what have you been doing?" The other one that I really appreciated, because it's so logical, a teacher was talking about how our sins are forgiven, and she was going over the plan of salvation, and she'd been going over it, and it was a fairly young group, and she just said, "Okay, now let's see if you've been paying attention. What's the first thing we need to do in order to have our sins forgiven?" And they all just sat there, and she said, "Now you know this. What is the first thing you need to do to have your sins forgiven?" And finally, one girl raised her hand, and she said, "First, you must sin." And so maybe we don't always get the right thing from the lesson. And again, I want to encourage you to look at the scriptures so that you do get the right thing, because sometimes I get in the way of them. We've been talking about fear. We have spent 2 lessons talking about the problems that are associated with fear, in addition to some of the things that we're actually going through right now. And I'm a little hesitant to do things like that, because I like upbeat lessons. But if we're not familiar with what we're up against, we can't handle it. I guess I've coached between, I don't know, 30 and 40 Little League teams to high school kids on different things. And one of the things that is always important when you're preparing kids to play a game, especially when you're playing good competition, is to let them know what they're up against. And if they're up against really good competition, you can't keep that from them. You've got to let them know, look, this is what they will be doing. This is where they're really good. This is where you're going to be really challenged. And you don't say that in order to scare them. You say that in order to say, you've got to be prepared for this. When we talk about the different things that we're up against, we don't do that in order to somehow try and scare people into doing things. Rather, we try and see what we're up against so that we can handle it properly. And God has a proper way to make sure that we don't have to live in fear. And again, going back to the theme of this lesson, if you fear God, you will not have to fear anything else. But if you do not fear God in the right way, you're going to end up fearing just about everything that comes across your way. Proverbs chapter 1 and verse 33 is where we ended last night, and I wanted to pick up again with that. If you want to turn over to Proverbs chapter 1, or if it's easier for you to listen, please do that. Ralph Waldo Emerson said, "Do the thing you fear, and the death of fear is certain." And I really like that, although there are some things that doesn't apply to. I'm afraid of jumping off a tall building, and I'm not going to do it, although I'm sure that the death of fear would be right behind it. But what he's talking about is this idea that some of the things that we are so timid with and so afraid of really are not something to be afraid of. The first time I got up and did a speech in school, I was scared to death. First time I got up in chapel at Lubbock Christian and spoke before the crowd there, I was scared to death. First time I got up and preached a lesson, I was scared to death. Took a while to get used to it, but after a while, once I started taking the focus off of myself and started thinking about whom I was talking about, it became easier and easier. If you keep doing things that you need to do, fear will eventually disappear. This is what God had Solomon write. Whoever listens to me, talking about God from wisdom's perspective, whoever listens to me will live in safety and be at ease without fear of harm. There are too many people who have a fear of harm right now, and we need to get rid of that. I'm not saying we need to get rid of our caution. We need to get rid of our fear. We need both, do we not? We need courage and caution to serve God well and to do well in this life. And so we're not talking about being incautious when we talk about doing away with fear. We're talking about the proper courage that God wants us to have, and it comes from a trust in Him. Ambrose Redmond said this: courage is not the absence of fear, rather it's the judgment that something else is more important than fear. Think about that for a moment. I don't even know who Ambrose Redmond is, but he sure had a good point. Let me read it again. Courage is not the absence of fear, rather it's the judgment that something's more important than fear. Imagine for a moment that you walk out of services today and there's a group of motorcycle guys around your vehicle. Are you going to go up to them and say, hey, get out of my way? Or are you going to use a little caution and say, I might just see if they'll move in a few minutes. Now, if they start scratching your car up, then you might call the police. But prudence will dictate you don't go up to a group of people who are up to no good and just pick a fight with them, even if they're trying to pick the fight first. But you take the same situation, the same group of motorcycle guys or whoever they are, and they're messing with your wife or one of our kids here. All of a sudden, confronting them does not seem so daunting. As a matter of fact, confronting them seems to be the most important thing you can do. Courage is not the absence of fear. It is the determination, many times, something's more important than fear. And if somebody is messing with one of our loved ones, that something is way more important than what might happen to us. And it's amazing how fear dissipates at that moment. And so now look at this passage, Hebrews chapter 11 and verse 7. By faith, Noah, when warned about things not yet seen, in holy fear, who is this fear of? It was of God. By faith, when Noah is warned about things not seen, in holy fear, built an ark to save his family. By faith, he condemned the world and became the heir of righteousness that comes by faith. Why did Noah build the ark? It was twofold, was it not? He had a holy fear of God. So he was going to live in obedience to God, even though this was a big project. It appears that this was 120 years before the flood was when he was first given an indication that he was going to build the ark. I don't know if he started building it then or not. I know a few years later, his 3 children were born. He's got something that's very important to protect. At the time, it was just he and his wife, wasn't it? Then his kids came into the picture. And then he started, I believe, if you and I were in that position, I think we would start to see what it meant to do something in order to protect our family, to save our family. And Noah had determined that regardless of whatever he was going to go through, I don't know if he went through ridicule or if people thought, hey, that's pretty neat. We sometimes try to assign things that he went through. We have no idea. But I do know, having done a little carpentry in the past, that a 120-year project is a big project. And it's not something that you would really necessarily look forward to. But if you were looking forward to saving and protecting your family, well, you do different things at that point, do you not? Because obedience to God and a fear of God becomes more important than the fear of the other things that you might have otherwise had. Noah became very notable and was a faithful man, a champion of faith, because he recognized that there was something more important than being afraid of the people around him or the things that might happen, and in holy fear of God built the ark. I don't know if they study different people in school like they used to. They probably do. It's just a different set of people. But one of the people that those of my generation probably would have learned about a little bit would have been Madame Curie. And Madame Curie was a French, I think, a physicist is what she did. But the interesting thing about Madame Curie was that she was the first woman to ever win a Nobel Prize. I think she won the Nobel Prize for physics. And then that wasn't enough. She moved to an entirely different field. It was related in a certain degree, but I believe it was the field of chemistry that she won a second Nobel Prize. She knew something about hard work and diving into something that maybe wasn't necessarily in most people's realm of comfort, much less a woman during this time. Marie Curie said this, she said, nothing in life is to be feared, it is only to be understood. Now is the time to understand more so that we can fear less. I can see why she won some Nobel Prizes. She was a fairly sharp individual. Things are not to be feared, only understood. And she's talking about in this life. She's not talking about God. She's not excluding our fear of God. We're commanded to do that, and that will become natural for the righteous. But when it comes to everything else, you don't have to fear it, but it's good to understand it. Just take some very practical things right now. We look at COVID right now, and for a long time, people have just been kind of cowering in fear. What if I get it? What if I get it? What if I get it? And as somebody who has had COVID, I can tell you, if you get it, you'll have it. And then you'll either get over it or you won't. But we're planning on going to heaven anyway. We don't want to be incautious with the people that we love. We don't want to take unnecessary chances with serious things, but you need to understand what is going on. And so I've done everything I could to understand this, even though it's just a physical thing. You know, one of the things I came across in the studies that they have done in other countries, not in America, but in other countries, they found out that at least in one nation, that 85% of the people that were in the hospital with COVID had a vitamin D deficiency. 85%. And you know what else they found? They found that 89% of those that were in the hospital with COVID, when given a super dose of vitamin D, got better almost instantly. They didn't get cured instantly, but they started getting better from that moment on. Now, when I found that out, I ordered some vitamin D. And I got COVID, and it wasn't terribly bad. I was very blessed. I don't want to be, I don't want to be cavalier about this. But I do want to say that that was good to have It was good to understand a little bit more. Even at the height of having it, we'd go out for a walk. We'd get a little extra vitamin D from the source that God has provided. And it seemed to help a little bit. People are talking very seriously about shortages right now. And they're of a different type that we had earlier. I can remember earlier in the year, because my background is in economics. It's like I say, it's a disease, but there it is. I'm not even trying to work on it. I just keep on doing it. But one of the things I realized very quickly was we're going to have shortages of things or have a hard time of getting certain things, not because they're not available, but because they can't get from point A to point B. The economists called it a supply chain interruption. And most of you, it's very obvious what that is. It's not that they didn't have the supplies, they just weren't moving them. And so I called up my kids and I said, you might want to think about stocking up a little bit on some food and things like toilet paper and other things that you like to use. And my middle daughter, or my middle child, my oldest daughter, told me later on, Dad, I thought you were crazy. And that's not the first time that I don't think that Sharice has just shared that with me, that she thought I was crazy. But she said, I was really glad you told me that. And I said, yeah, well, if you thought I was crazy then, you're going to think I'm really crazy now, because that was just because there'd be an interruption in supply. I think you're going to be looking at things a little bit later where there's no supply in the chain to be moved. And you might want to start stocking up again. And Sharice is just like, great. So anyway, understanding things don't necessarily make them easier to go through. But understanding things, whether you're right or wrong in your understanding, it at least helps you to approach it in the most rational way that you can, the most cautious way that you can. When it comes to Christianity, Job, in Job chapter 28, said, the fear of the Lord, that is wisdom. To shun evil is understanding. We live in a society right now that thinks they can get as close to evil, they can embrace evil, and they can participate in evil and not suffer any problems with it. And if they really like that evil that they're participating in, they think that they can then shame other people into saying this is not evil, it's great, or at least being quiet about it. Don't tell me I'm doing wrong. People get too close to it. The fear of the Lord, that's wisdom, Job said, of all the people of all time. When Satan wanted to test one of God's children, God permitted it to be Job. You remember what he said to Satan? Have you considered my servant Job? And he allowed a test to be made. I think that test was allowed to be made on our behalf, so that we could read that even a righteous man can falter under difficult times, but he can stop that faltering and he can catch himself and he can do the right thing. And that's exactly what Job did. And now we're getting closer to the end of Job, and Job just makes the point, it's the fear of God that's wisdom, and shunning evil is understanding. And when we live around people who do not shun evil, we see what happens when people don't understand. I think 2.5 years ago, I gave this example. So those of you who were here 2.5 years ago might remember it, but it was the example of the lions. There are three different lion attacks. The first involved an antelope herd, and there was an antelope herd that was out grazing. It wasn't in Colorado. It was in Africa, and so there were lions about. And the younger antelope just kind of got further and further away from the herd. It was strong, it was fast, and it didn't have much experience. What it didn't know was that there was a lion in the grass stalking it. And there came a point where the young antelope lifted his head up and he saw he was a ways from the herd, but he also caught something. I don't know if it was a movement or a scent or whatever it was, but he froze. He realized he was in danger. And he took off, but it was too late. He became dinner for the lion. The other example that I came across was one of a couple of photographers who were on a photographic safari in Africa. And they came across just what they were wanting to see. It was a lion kill. As a matter of fact, there was an entire pride of lions that were devouring something, and they stopped their vehicle, and they stayed in the vehicle, of course, and they started taking pictures. But one of them got so engrossed in what was going on, he's kind of opened his door and stood out and got a little bit better picture. He didn't have to worry about the windshield. And then continuing to get more and more interested in what he was doing, he started walking a little bit closer to the lions and taking pictures. A lion can move at the rate of about 90 feet in a second and a half. That means that's a basketball court. Now, I had one of my kids was the fastest one I've ever seen get up the basketball court with the basketball before. She would do just really weird things, and then she exploded her knee, and then she was slow as could be. But that's beside the point. Going up the basketball court in about 5 or 6 seconds is a pretty good rate when you're dribbling the basketball. A second and a half is 1,000 to 1, 1,000, and you're eaten. And that's what happened to the photographer. And the other photographer, who was a great friend, stayed in the vehicle and took pictures of the whole thing. The third example, my favorite example, is turn of not this last century, but the century before that, late 1800s, early 1900s. This was a game warden on horseback in lion country, knew he was in lion country. He was prepared. He had a high-powered rifle in one hand. He had a knife strapped to his side and a pistol strapped to his side. He was riding this horse, and as he was riding this horse, he was looking and looking and looking to make sure that there wasn't danger around. Wasn't prepared for what had happened because there was a lion on one side of his path and there was a lion on the other side of his path. And when one lion came out and went to the back of the horse, the other lion came and went at the front of the horse, and they spun the horse around. When he woke up, when he regained consciousness, he looked up from where he was with searing pain in his shoulder, and he realized he was being drugged by this lion. And what he did was he finally was able to locate his knife. And as he was being drugged backwards by this lion, he was able to get his knife up into the rib cage where he thought the heart was, and he was able finally to at least stop the lion. I don't know if he killed it or not. But think about that. He was prepared, he was alert, and he was still in for the fight of his life. When we understand danger, we are not going to be incautious like the young antelope or careless like the photographer, but we still may be in for the fight of our life because evil is all around us. Are you up for the fight is the question. I'm not asking you men if you're macho enough for the fight. I'm asking you if you are faithful enough for the fight. Does God and the cause of Christianity worth it to you to be able to take the stands that you need to stand in a loving but a firm way? Shun evil. To shun evil is understanding. The last passage we're going to look at is a passage that Joe read to begin this, and I really like that passage because this is one of the greatest understandings that will help us to do away with fear. It's found in 1 John chapter 4 and verse 18. It says, there is no fear in love. Doesn't say there's no caution in love. Doesn't say there's no concern in love. It says there's no fear in love. But perfect love drives out fear because fear has to do with punishment. The one who fears is not made perfect in love. We are told that if we are with God, we don't have to fear. Do you have a love for God enough to not have to fear the things that men fear? You will if you fear God and keep his commandments. And if you don't, well, you're just in for it. We live in a society that seems to be in perpetual fear. And when you're not in fear with them, it seems to just drive them crazy. I'm not saying not to sympathize with people, and I'm not saying that we don't need to have some courtesy and respect towards them and the things that concern them, but I am saying our duty is to do the will of God. If we will fear God and keep his commandments, is that not what Solomon concluded at the end of Ecclesiastes? We're going to do really well. But it's going to take an understanding of what fear is, plus an understanding of who God is. And once we combine that, we'll be able to live successfully as servants of God. The question is, will we do that? We're going to close today, but we do want to offer the invitation. It may be that someone who's been thinking about becoming a Christian is ready to do that today. We would love to help you with that if this is the day you've chosen. If you have not chosen it yet and you're getting close to that time, I urge you to think about it. There is a fear for those who don't fear God that is legitimate, and it's a fear of being lost. Don't wait too long. If you've fallen away and need the prayers of the congregation, we can help you with that as well. It'd be our honor to do that. If you would just like to pray to God on your own, if you're a Christian, you certainly have that right to do that. You take care of it where you are. But if you have any needs that you'd like to share with the congregation, won't you come forward and let them be known while we stand and sing?